join the live feed right now. Your name's not coming up, so just to give you a heads up that right now I'm just giving it a few minutes for everyone to kind of just jump right in and be able to join in the video with dealing with the question of, does the Bible say anything about UFOs? And so just giving it just a couple minutes, if you will, just bear with me just a couple minutes, allowing others to kind of join in, and we'll see that we have many that has just jumped in right now. So we'll just go ahead and get started then. Well, I want to welcome everybody to another conversation with Cory. I'm very thankful to kind of get this series started up again. The last several weeks I have been neglecting to do these videos. I apologize, mainly because of the whole COVID-19 thing. I was hoping, to be honest, I was hoping to actually get a lot of these questions answered during this pandemic. I thought it was going to give me more time to kind of deal with many of those questions that people have sent me, but unfortunately I actually became busier than what I had expected. And then so right now I'm finally able to spend some time in answering your questions that you have sent in. And the one question that has been just piling up nonstop in my messages is the question, does the Bible say anything about UFOs? Does it say anything about aliens? Do you believe in aliens? And so forth. And if aliens do exist, is that going to hurt your faith? And so a lot of people, especially in the church today, I want to emphasize this, is that many within the church, our brotherhood, the churches of Christ, tend to really shy away from answering this question. Honestly, I don't know why. Many probably just think it's a foolish question, but I think personally it's an important question. This is a question, I will say this, that the majority of those that have sent me asking this question are made up of the youth, made up from ranging the age of 15 to 30. And folks, I don't know what to say except looking at the facts of how many people have been sending me messages asking the same question about UFOs or aliens, extraterrestrial life form. And I can't help but to be convicted to answer this question. It's an important question. It's a struggle that many of our youth are dealing with. They watch these videos, they watch ancient aliens and so forth, and they begin to start getting a little bit easily convinced. Notice what I said, easily convinced into the study of extraterrestrial life form or UFOs and stuff like that. And so, folks and brothers and fellow preachers of the church, this is an important question that we need to deal with. That we need to sit down with our youth, those that are in, the youth that are in our congregation. We need to sit down and talk with them. They have these questions. They're a little bit too embarrassed to ask these questions, feeling that they're doubting or they're going to get shunned. But the fact of the matter is that I had dealt with this question. And so I spent my time studying and researching into this, and I believe it's an important question. And to begin this, the answer to this question, what does the Bible say about UFOs? Well, first off, does the Bible say anything about UFOs? The answer is no. And those who tend to advocate in favor of the yes answer tend to jump to Ezekiel chapter 1. They jump to Ezekiel chapter 1, and they are looking at Ezekiel's vision about the wheel within the wheel, and they tend to jump to conclusions real quick and to say that, see, it's talking about a wheel in the sky, and if you look at its description, it says it's like a silver plate that is shiny, that is silver and shiny. Well, and they tend to jump to conclusion to think that, hey, he's looking and he's witnessing a UFO. Well, the answer is no. And I'm going to back up my arguments with logical reasoning and by the context of the scripture. That is the key in understanding Ezekiel's wheel in chapter 1. His whole vision, I would say, in Ezekiel chapter 1 is that we need to look at the context. Context determines meaning all the time. So if you have your Bibles, I would encourage you to join me in Ezekiel chapter 1, and we're going to look at his vision. And we're going to prove that he is not witnessing and looking at a UFO. And we're going to look at his vision descriptively, and we're going to get pretty deep into his vision. And to begin with, in chapter 1 of Ezekiel, his description is described in figurative language. I will say figurative, apocalyptic language. Many people have decided to read the book only to be discouraged after encountering the first chapter. While some find the apocalyptic images to be very fascinating as well as challenging, others would prefer to receive their information without so much effort. Simply stated, the goal of this vision was to give a demonstration of God and his magnificent glory. The whole point of his vision in chapter 1 is to demonstrate God's magnificent glory. So why did God not just state truths about his glory in decisive terms? Why did God use the figurative method or the apocalyptic method of establishing such concepts? Well, first, we must remind ourselves of the perfect nature of God and his omniscience. God knows the best and the most perfect way to communicate important truths. And here he is talking to his people, the Jewish people, who were very fascinated and who were very well known with apocalyptic literature. That was one of their ways of being able to communicate with them, is through apocalyptic literature. Since God is spirit, John chapter 4, verse 23 and 24, human terms cannot fully convey his glory. So therefore, the use of apocalyptic visions, such as the one here in Ezekiel chapter 1, enables us to see his awesomeness and his magnificent glory in terms that we are more likely to appreciate. Secondly, a difficult task lay ahead of Ezekiel, okay? He was being sent to a stubborn and obstinate people, chapter 3, verse 7 of Ezekiel. This vision would help him to recall God's greatness and the greatness of God of whom he was serving. By remembering this vision, Ezekiel would be continually strengthened and motivated to face the obstacles of preaching to such a people. Third, we must remember that many people during the Old Testament times believed that the gods of conquered nations were the stronger gods. This is the reason they deserted their gods to serve the gods of a conquering army. This point, this vision, is illustrated throughout the Old Testament. So what is remarkable is how the Israelites were so inclined to idolatry that they did what the other nations did not do: adopt the gods of the defeated nations. You can see 2 Kings chapter 16, verse 3, and 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 8. So Ezekiel, as a result of this vision, would have sufficient evidence that the Babylonian gods, or any other gods for that matter, were powerless, unlike the one true God, Jehovah, Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. He would be motivated to proclaim the excellencies of the Lord and encourage the people to renew their covenant with him. If they would do this, they would find a God who was willing to forgive and reestablish them in their land. So, for us, when we read Ezekiel chapter 1, what should we keep in mind when we are interpreting this type of literature? Again, apocalyptic literature. Ezekiel was painting a picture, and all the parts of this vision help form the whole picture. These parts do not necessarily have meanings in and of themselves. Many times, phrases with the word like or as are used. This construction is known as a simile. A simile tells us that Ezekiel's description is at best a likeness and an approximation, in other words, of what he was actually seeing. So the word likeness is actually seen here in Ezekiel chapter 1, and it is used 16 times. 16 times in Ezekiel, and the word like is found 18 times in chapter 1. So in addition, notice the use of like with the word appearance. When we read through his vision of chapter 1, I want you to notice how the word like is in connection with the word appearance. So in preparation for the study of this incredible vision, we should note the four pictures of this vision. The vision is separated into like four small little pictures, or puzzle pieces, as you might want to say or see it as. And in these puzzle pieces, it's divided into four pieces. Number one, he begins by looking at the four living creatures, verse 4 through 14. The four living creatures. And then he talks about the wheel. The wheel is the second piece, and that's verse 15 through 21. And then he talks about the expanse in the vision. That's the third piece, verse 22 through 25. And then he focuses on the final piece, which is the throne, verse 26 through 28. Now, those who advocate the yes answer regarding does the Bible talk about UFOs, they jump to Ezekiel chapter 1 and they say yes. The wheel that is mentioned, piece number 2, the wheel, verse 15 through 21, they would say that what Ezekiel is witnessing and seeing with his very own eye is a UFO. Well, again, the true answer is no. No. And so we're going to look at beginning with piece number 2, and we're going to look at piece number 3 and 4. We're not going to jump much into the first piece, but when you look at piece 2, 3, and 4, we will reflect back to piece number 1 about the four living creatures. But I want us to begin with the definite answer of the wheel, beginning at verse 15 of his vision. Verse 15 of Ezekiel chapter 1, he says, "Now as I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the four of them. As for the appearance of the wheels and their construction, their appearance was like the gleaming of beryl, and the four had the same likeness, their appearance and construction being as it were a wheel within a wheel. When they went in any of their four directions without turning as they went. And their rims were tall and awesome, and the rims of all four were full of eyes all around. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went beside them. And when the living creatures rose from the earth, the wheels rose. Wherever the Spirit wanted to go, they went, and the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went. And when those stood, these stood. And when those rose from the earth, the wheels rose along with them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels." So again, this is the second piece of the whole puzzle of Ezekiel's vision, is the wheels. Those who say that, yes, the Bible does talk about UFOs, they go to this right here. They go to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 15 through 21 and say that, yes, what Ezekiel's seeing is a UFO, a shiny little disc that is zooming back and forth by the speed of light in every single direction, north, south, east, and west, and they don't have to turn. They just zoom and they're gone. Warp speed, they're gone. But however, that is not what Ezekiel is seeing. He is not seeing a UFO. The wheels in this vision, the word itself is, the translation of the word is very challenging for most translators. The Hebrew term has been suggested to mean sparkling beryl, chrysolite or yellow jasper or topaz. Those were very valuable, precious stones. It is important to remember that the wheels are a symbol for something and are not meant to be interpreted literally. The wheels probably represent the idea of the activity of God or his movement. God is omniscient, but he's also omnipresent. His presence is everywhere. He's right here. He's with you right now, wherever you are watching this live feed, his presence is all over. His movement is fast. He's there just like that, just like warp speed, just like the speed of light. This is referring to the movement and activity of God. The Jews in Babylonia perhaps did not believe that God could come to them there. The idea existed in the ancient world and in many Jewish people's minds that God was confined to one geographical area. 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 23 and 28. You can look at that as a reference to that idea. They may have believed that he was limited to the areas surrounding Jerusalem and therefore could not be with them in Babylonia. These wheels show otherwise. The omnipresence of God is being described in apocalyptic terms. And he says that these wheels were within one another. Now, within one another could mean that the second wheel was concentric with the first wheel. Like an archery target, or that it was perpendicular to, the first wheel. This construction would allow the wheels to be rolling constantly, never needing to turn, verse 17. And so what we see here is that the living creatures from the first part of the vision, the four living creatures of verse 4 through 14, these creatures were within them and they were by these wheels. The living beings did not move independently of the wheels. They moved in complete harmony with the wheels. These wheels were not inanimate objects. They had spirits inside of them, verse 20. The fact that Ezekiel repeated this point is noteworthy. How were the wheels and the living beings able to move in perfect harmony? Well, he explained the end of verse 21. He says, "For the spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. The same spirit that led the living beings also dwelt within the wheels." Such a characteristic is apparently not something Ezekiel could witness, but he knew this truth through revelation of what God is revealing to him from these visions, or from this vision, this part of his vision. And so we see that the wheel within a wheel were like two wheels that were perpendicular of each other, or they were concentric to each other, and within it had a spirit, and the living creatures were flying by it, and so when it moved, they moved in perfect, complete harmony. Again, what was his point though? What's the point of the wheels? What is the idea of what God is trying to indicate through Ezekiel in this vision? Is that he is omnipresent. The omnipresence of God, his activity and his movement is in perfect, complete harmony. God is not a God who is just, one that is so far away from us that he is not active in this world, that he is not active in our life. The point he is trying to make to the Jews is that, yes, even though you are in Babylon, held captive in Babylon, God is not far from you. God is not in one geographical area of Jerusalem. No, he is everywhere. His movement, his activity in this world and in our individual lives is in perfect, complete harmony. God is everywhere around us. That is the point of what the second part of this vision is trying to convey. I'll say it again. I know I sound like a broken record, but many people just sometimes still don't get it. What the wheels are trying to indicate is God's perfect, complete harmony in his activity and in his movement, his omnipresence. So the third part of the vision, or the third puzzle piece, is referring to the expanse, verse 22 through 25. It says, "Over the heads of the living creatures there was the likeness of an expanse, shining like all-inspiring crystal, spread out above their heads. And under the expanse their wings were stretched out straight, one toward another, and each creature had two wings covering its body. And when they went, I heard the sound of their wings like the sound of many waters, like the sound of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army. When they stood still, they let down their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse over their heads. When they stood still, they let down their wings. So this word for expanse in the Hebrew is the same word used in Genesis chapter 1, verse 6 through 8, for the hard plain dividing the upper from the lower waters. In other words, the word firmament is used in the King James Version, although this is not that's not a good translation. The expanse seems to represent the widespread influence of God. Ezekiel did not dwell upon the expanse. He merely described that which provided the inspiring backdrop to the whole scene. Nevertheless, it appears that the expanse provided a firm, level surface upon which the throne of God was resting upon. And you can look at Revelation chapter 4, verse 6 regarding that. So it is obvious, when we look at verse 23 and 24, it is obvious that the wings of the living beings continue to impress Ezekiel. In this section, he repeated their location, but this time elaborated on the tremendous sound that was made in verse 24, that were being made by these wings. He offered three analogies. He says the noise was like the sound of abundant waters, which provide a tremendous roar, almost a deafening sound when to one standing near a waterfall. It was like the voice of the Almighty, he says, a voice that completely terrified those gathered around Mount Sinai in Exodus chapter 20. But sometimes a term that is referred to as thunder. The sound of tumult, like the sound of an army camp, sound of an army, which would involve a variety of sounds from the clanking of gear and weapons to the grunts and groans and the cries and the battle cries of the soldiers. Not only was Ezekiel impressed with what he was seeing, but he was also awestruck with what he was hearing. He was able to witness God's glory in different ways, by sight and by sound. Verse 25, in spite of all the noise generated by the wings of the four living creatures, Ezekiel was able to hear a voice from above the expanse, from the location of the throne of God. Ezekiel mentioned no words that were uttered, at least not yet. But the Lord spoke to him, and we'll see that in chapter 2. He said that he heard a voice above the expanse coming from the throne of God. Whose voice could that be? None other than the Almighty God himself. The third puzzle piece that we see in verse 26 through the end of the chapter is the throne. Is the throne. And above the expanse over their heads there was the likeness of a throne, an appearance like sapphire, and seated above the likeness of a throne was a likeness with a human appearance, and upward from what had the appearance of his waist I saw as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. And downward from what had the appearance of his waist I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness around him. Like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness all around. Such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face, and I heard the voice of one speaking. The last part of verse 28, such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of God, is really the summary, the conclusion of what the vision was to demonstrate. The magnificent glory of God. When I saw it, Ezekiel says, I fell on my face and I heard the voice of one speaking. What Ezekiel saw was not an actual throne, but something resembling a throne, he says, verse 26. It was like, he says, the likeness of a throne, an appearance like sapphire, he says. A sapphire, a stone that was very valuable in the ancient world. Ezekiel did not dwell on the throne itself because he who was on the throne is far more important. So he's not just talking about the throne room, he's talking about the one seated on the throne, God himself. Nevertheless, a throne is always an image of power and authority. The word throne is a key word in the revelation here and the vision that's given to Ezekiel. Here, Ezekiel is relating to the universal power of the King of Kings. God's throne rises above the feeble attempts of authority and rule of man. It is far more glorious than the imagined thrones of pagan gods. It is far more powerful, far more magnifying than the throne of Babylon. Yes, the Jews taken into Babylonian captivity. Well, guess what? They're not going to be there forever. Babylon thinks they're the best empire in the world, the best kingdom in the world. Well, there's a kingdom that is far more powerful, a kingdom that cannot be destroyed by the hands of men, and that is God's kingdom. God's kingdom, His kingdom is the King of Kings, who is all powerful, His presence is everywhere. He rises far above the expanse of this world, of this firmament. His activity, His movement, He is active in the lives of His people. He is active in this world. He is in complete control of this world. And He reigns far above all rule, all dominion, all authority in the heavenly realms and on earth. Ezekiel described God in symbolic terms, saying that He had the appearance of a man with a human appearance, the English Standard Version says. He took great pains to avoid trying to identify God as being a like creature, because God is indescribable and cannot be compared to anything or anyone. But the awe-inspiring portrayal that he sees of God in verse 27, upward from what had the appearance of His waist, I saw it as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance. Remember those two key words I told you to pay attention. The word like with the word appearance. Like the appearance of fire enclosed all around. The awe-inspiring portrayal of God in this verse emphasizes three primary features: His fearsomeness, His radiance, and His majesty. God is depicted as being surrounded from His waist up, something glowing like electrum, glowing metal. From His waist down, Ezekiel said that He was encompassed by what looked like fire. The entire figure then was encompassed with splendor. Fire is that which can destroy in judgment or can illuminate. Ezekiel would announce the fiery judgments of God later on in his book. But the description of God that continues on in verse 28, the beginning of it, like the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness all around. For the Jews, the rainbow was a symbol of God's mercy and God's covenants and His promise to never again, flood or destroy the earth by a global flood, by water. Genesis chapter 9, verse 13. A rainbow comes after a storm. In this case, the storm of God's judgment was coming, but there was hope. There was hope. There would be a rainbow after the storm, providing hope for the future. Just as the colors of the rainbow are not real, but merely the effect of sunlight, so the likeness of the glory of God as visualized by the prophet was only the reflection of the divine light. Folks, for God's people, judgment was going to come because they have disobeyed Him, they had fallen away, they're going to be taken into Babylonian captivity. But God says that yes, that fiery judgment is going to come, but for you, there's going to be that rainbow of hope, the hope that comes after the storm. And that hope was going to be renewing His people, restoring His covenant with them, making them His people once again, and the people of Israel making God to be their one true God once again. And then that fiery judgment was going to fall and down on Babylon and Assyria in order to free his people from the king, to free his people who were divided into two kingdoms at the time, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. So in each vision, Ezekiel was careful to distinguish God's glory in its attendant circumstances. So when we look at Ezekiel chapter 1, going back to the main question, does the Bible talk about, mention anything about UFOs? People who say yes tend to jump to Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 15 through 21 and following. But I hope that looking at Ezekiel chapter 1 as a whole and kind of narrowing down the four parts of Ezekiel's vision, the four living creatures, or known as the cherubim and seraphim, the wheels, the expanse and the throne of God, hopefully by looking at this and putting the piece together to see that one whole puzzle, hopefully you are convinced by God's word, not by me, by God's word and by the context that no, Ezekiel did not see a UFO. He is simply explaining and demonstrating God's wonderful, awesome, majestic power and glory. That was the whole point of the vision, was to show and demonstrate God's awesome, magnificent glory through these four parts of his vision in chapter 1. So what can we learn from Ezekiel chapter 1? What can we learn for us today about this? Well, one thing that we learn from Ezekiel's vision is that we learn from specific context, we specifically learn about God's great and awesome attributes. This apocalyptic vision presents God's greatness and majesty. Three truths are taught about the nature and the attributes of God. Number one, he can bring judgment. Number two, he has the power, all power. He's omnipotent. To do this, as represented by the four living creatures, God is all powerful. When you look at the first part of his vision, verse 4 through 14, it talks about the living creatures who had four faces, and their descriptions are very similar to the creatures mentioned in Revelation chapter 4. Revelation chapter 4, it mentions about the cherubim and the seraphim. They are very similar. These are creatures that God has made. And for to see an awesome creature before your very own eyes in his vision, it represents God's awesome power and ability to create something so majestic looking and mysterious looking, such as the cherubim and the seraphim. It represented God's omnipotence. And then when you look at the wheel, it represents God's omnipresence. His presence and his activity is everywhere. And then when you look at the expanse and the throne, represents God's omniscience. He's all-knowing. He's far above all nations of the earth. He has all authority, all power, all dominion over the nations of the earth. He's all-knowing. We nations today think that we have it all figured out. But the fact of the matter is that we don't. But I'll tell you one who has everything all figured out because he's all-knowing. It is the God Almighty. He will bring about universal judgment. Because of his ability to be everywhere, his power is not limited to Judea, and no man can escape justice. The rainbow that we see in verse 28 reminds us of God's mercy. God made the rainbow as a sign of covenant with Noah and the promise to us universally that he will never again destroy the world, this world by a global flood or by water. Though we are sinful, God has shown us mercy. His new covenant offers hope for salvation through Jesus' blood and through his blood alone. It's not enough to just ask Jesus into your heart, because if you just ask him into your heart, how are you going to come into contact with his blood? His blood is only accessed through baptism. When a person believes with all their heart, repents of their sin, confesses him as Lord, Master, and ruler of their life, and then is buried with him in baptism, is where we come into contact with his blood to have our sins washed away. Acts chapter 22, verse 16, and 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 11. So we learn about God's great attributes. We also learn about the wheel that Ezekiel saw, again, has received much attention and sparked the imagination to ponder what they looked like and what purposes they served. Did they look like ancient chariot wheels? Could they have looked more like a space station or a transporter or a UFO? Questions like these are sometimes asked when reading apocalyptic literature. But folks, again, I want to encourage you and in a way admonish and warn you that one must approach prophetic apocalyptic literature and studies responsibly. While an eager literalist can misinterpret the symbolism found in Ezekiel chapter 1, another reader may have an aversion to difficult passages in the scriptures. This person may erroneously conclude that the book of Ezekiel is not worth the effort to read. What we must recognize is that apocalyptic literature, although both sensational and difficult, has its own unique beauty. Try to imagine the Jews in exile and their situation. They were displaced. Not only were they suffering the pains of a foreign military's occupation and the destruction of their way of life, but they also were learning how to live in a new culture and speak a new language. The gods of Babylonia seemed to be the victors of this terrible battle, and the Jews' own conception of Yahweh, the one true God, who allowed these things to happen, was being challenged. Why would Yahweh, our one true God, allow this to happen? But yet, they failed to realize that things happen this way because of their own free will, to choose to turn their backs on their one true God and to serve their own sinful desires. As a people defeated, displaced, and distressed, they needed answers for their plight. How appropriate were the wheels of God's transport. At a time when they needed him the most, the message of Ezekiel, delivered from his vision, reassured them of God's universal presence, of his all power, and how he is all active in the lives of everyone in the world and in their lives. God is still active, and of his universal presence, he's still with them, and he is going to make things right. He will. Indeed, even though the nation of Israel had rebelled against their Lord, he continued to move among them. He continued to live and to be among them, no matter where they were, and to provide another opportunity for their deliverance. Folks, it's fascinating when we look at Ezekiel chapter 1. And I know that may be a mouthful, which is why, thankfully, I'm recording this. You can go back and listen to the message again, and you can feel free to look it up on our YouTube channel, the Pain Burn Church of Christ YouTube channel. I will be uploading it on there pretty soon. But to go back to the main question, does the Bible say anything about UFOs? Well, no, it doesn't. Those who think that Ezekiel chapter 1, the wheel within a wheel is referring to a UFO is mistaken. They are literalists who find it fascinating, which is a good thing. I find Ezekiel chapter 1 very fascinating, but we can't jump to the literal interpretation of it. We can't jump to conclusions and to say that, oh, it's a UFO, it's a UFO, it's a UFO. Well, no, it's not. It's not a UFO. Not when you look at the whole context of his vision. Context always determines meaning. And so when we look at the context from this session, in this video, now this study, we have determined and concluded that the wheels is a symbolism, a metaphor, apocalyptic literature, a simile used to represent the omnipresence of God. He is ever present. His movement is like the speed of light, even though that he's here. He's here right now with me, and he's there right now with you, wherever you are watching this live feed. God, his presence is everywhere. And so another quick point I want to make is because a person, many people have, again, as I mentioned, sent me messages asking this question. And this question just kept piling up with many people wanting to know about it. And some have followed up with the question of, okay, well, do you believe in UFOs? Where's your position on it? Here's my thing. Do I believe in UFOs? Well, first off, understand what the word UFO means. Unidentified flying object. Sadly, people nowadays, when they hear UFO, immediately think of extraterrestrial life form, alien life form. Well, no, that's not what UFO means. It means an unidentified flying object. It's something that you see in the sky, but you don't know what it is. It's a bird, it's a plane, oh, it's Superman. Oh, okay, so see, it's an unidentified flying object. We don't know. We can't make it out. We don't know what it is. That's what a UFO means, unidentified flying object. So, have there been things that I've seen in the sky before that I couldn't make out, that I couldn't identify? Yeah, many times. And many times I laugh at myself when I find out what it was. It was just a balloon. A balloon that had popped and it was just going all around. And I was trying to figure out what it was until finally when I found the position of where it landed, it was a balloon that had popped. And so many things could be unidentified to, the naked eye when we look at it. But then another question that had popped up following along with that is, if there were extraterrestrial life form, would that hurt my faith? Well, passage that I want to share with you is Hebrews chapter 1, real quickly. Hebrews chapter 1. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. In the Greek, that word world is very, very unique. It occurs only twice in the New Testament. It occurs here, and it occurs later in chapter 11 of Hebrews. I believe right around verse 2, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe right around there. But what that Greek word for world, it's not cosmos. John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. In John 3:16, the Greek word for world is cosmos, referring to this whole blue planet. But here, the Greek word for world literally means the totality of all that is made up in the universe. So proper translation of that word would be universe. He created the universe. Everything that is made up, the totality of all that is made up in the universe, all the galaxies, all the stars, all the suns, all the planets, yes, all, the totality, the entire universe. We live in a big universe, but guess what? We have a bigger God. God is so much bigger than this universe. He created it all. And so if that is a big capital I, capital F, if extraterrestrial life form existed, would that hurt my faith? Absolutely not, because of Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. If they existed, they were created by God. They were created by God. And so, again, my personal opinion, do I believe they exist? No. There's not any evidence. So far, what scientists for the last several years have been, what they've been trying to look and discover is there any life form on any other planet? And so far, from all of their dozens and dozens of years of researching and discovering, guess how many places and planets they have found with life form? Zero. So no, there's no evidence. No evidence whatsoever. And so if they ever were to find any life form on any planet, God created them. Simple as that. Thank you all so much for joining me. I hope I answered those questions thoroughly. I know Ezekiel chapter 1 was a little bit deep, which is why I provided a recording of this. You can go back and rewatch it in case if you need some more clarification on that, or if you're taking notes and I'm going too fast and you're needing to go back and listen and write down those notes again, well, feel free to look it up on the I'm going live on my page, so feel free to look at it on my page, or I'll be uploading this to the Painburn Church of Christ YouTube channel. If you're interested, I encourage you to please please subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you'll get notifications of sermons and classes and more of these series of conversations with Cory being uploaded to the channel. And also with the more subscribers that we have, the more options and the better options that will be available to us of being able to reach out further across the world internationally, of reaching to people of the gospel truth of Jesus Christ, of the life and the love of Jesus, for them to be able to hear the good news of Jesus Christ. And so I encourage you to please subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you have any questions that you're wanting me to answer from the Bible, any certain passage, book of the Bible, or topic, or specific verse that you're wanting me to discuss and to answer, I'll be more than willing to do some time of studying, get my thoughts and the notes ready, and to be able to answer your question through another episode or another session with a conversation with Cory. Thank y'all so much for tuning in, and I hope that y'all are having a wonderful, blessed day, and keep on keeping on.